The great hall of the collective stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian floors and towering crystalline pillars. Light from a captured star filtered through the domed ceiling, casting rainbow shadows across. The 12 massive thrones, where the rulers of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations sat in eternal. Judgment. Ambassador Alina Vasquez stood in the center of this hall, as her mother had stood, as her grandmother had stood, as 7 generations of human diplomats had stood for 300 years. She was small compared to the beings that surrounded her. The insectoid Cathari delegate towered 4 meters tall, his chitinous body clicking with impatience. The crystalline Varathi ambassador pulsed with inner light, our form shifting between solid and liquid as her emotions changed. The serpentine High Arbiter Zixthal coiled upon his throne like a living mountain, his scales older than human civilization itself. Alina felt the weight of their gazes. Some curious, some bored, most dismissive. She had grown used to that dismissal. Every human who stood in this hall had grown used to it. The territorial dispute between the Cathari swarm and the Varathi dominion has entered its 47th year, Lena announced, her voice amplified by the translation systems that humans had designed and installed 2 centuries ago. Both parties have agreed to accept human mediation once again. The Cathari delegates' mandibles clicked rapidly. The swarm accepts mediation only because the humans have proven themselves neutral. Unlike certain other species, his compound eyes fixed on the Varathi ambassador, the Dominion has never violated a human-brokered treaty, the Varathi countered, her crystalline form flashing with angry red light. The same cannot be said of the swarm's commitment to the asteroid accords. Lena raised her hand, and remarkably, both ancient and powerful species fell silent. This was the strange magic of humanity's position in the galaxy. They had no great war fleets. Their 12 colony worlds were tiny compared to the vast empires represented in this hall. Their lifespans were laughably short, their bodies fragile, their technology borrowed and adapted rather than invented. And yet, when a human raised their hand, the galaxy listened, because humanity had made themselves useful, indispensable even. 300 years ago, when the first human ships had stumbled through a natural wormhole and found themselves face to face with the collective, the 12 ruling species had laughed at these soft, weak creatures from an insignificant world. The Cathari had suggested enslaving them. The Varathi had proposed study and eventual extinction. The synthetic Concord had calculated their threat level at essentially 0, and recommended ignoring them entirely. But humanity had not come with weapons or demands. They had come with something far more dangerous. They had come with the desire to help. Within a decade, human engineers were solving problems that had plagued alien civilizations for millennia. Human doctors were adapting treatments across species barriers. Human diplomats were mediating conflicts that had burned for centuries. Humanity threw themselves into the work of making the galaxy better, asking for nothing in return except friendship. The galaxy had taken that friendship and turned it into servitude. Alina thought about this as she spent the next 6 hours carefully, navigating the egos of 2 species that could destroy her entire civilization with a single fleet action. She proposed compromises. She soothed wounded pride. She found common ground where none seemed to exist. By the session's end, both the Cathari and Varathi had agreed to a preliminary framework for peace. Neither thanked her. They never did, as the delegates filed out of the Great Hall. Alina gathered her documents and prepared for the journey back to her quarters. A soft voice stopped her. Another successful mediation. Ambassador Vasquez. She turned to find High Arbiter Zixthal had remained behind. His massive serpentine body moved with surprising grace as he descended from his throne. Up close, Alina could see the patterns in his scales, each one a record of his 4,000 years of life. He was older than human writing, older than human cities. He had watched species rise and fall like seasons. "High Arbiter," Alina said, bowing her head respectfully. "I am honored by your attention." "You humans are always so polite," Zixthal observed. "So eager to please. So desperate for approval." Alina kept her expression neutral, though something hot flickered in her chest. I wish to discuss the matter you raised at the last session, she said carefully. Regarding Earth's petition for sovereign recognition and collective protection, Zixthal's ancient eyes, slitted like a cat's but golden as twin suns, regarded her with something that might have been amusement. Ah, yes. Your little request. It has been our request for 300 years, High Arbiter. My ancestors made this same petition to your predecessors. We have told your ancestors the same thing we tell you now. Zixthal's coils shifted, a gesture Alina had learned to recognize as dismissal. The matter is complicated. Perhaps next century. Alina felt the words like a physical blow, though she had known they were coming. She had always known. Every human ambassador knew. May I ask, she said, her voice steady despite the storm building inside her, what exactly makes our petition so complicated? We have served the collective faithfully for 3 centuries. We have mediated your wars, healed your sick, built your infrastructure. Human technology runs 60% of your communication networks. Human agricultural techniques feed hundreds of billions of your citizens. For this service, you receive payment, Zixtal interrupted smoothly. You receive trade rights. You receive access to our technology. You receive protection from external threats. You receive permission to exist, Alina corrected quietly. That is not the same as recognition. The High Arbiter's tongue flickered out, tasting the air. You are bold for such a short-lived species. Bold and useful. That is why we tolerate you. Tolerate. What other word would you prefer? Zixtal began moving toward the exit, his massive body flowing across the obsidian floor. You are young, Ambassador. Your species is young. Perhaps in another millennium, when you have proven your staying power, the collective will reconsider. And if we grow tired of waiting? The question escaped before Alina could stop it. Zixtal paused, turning one golden eye back toward her. Tired? He made a sound that might have been laughter. What would you do, little human? Declare war? Your entire species could be eliminated in an afternoon. You have no leverage. You have no power. You have only your usefulness, and that usefulness depends entirely on our continued goodwill. He slithered out of the hall without another word. Alina stood alone in the vast empty space, surrounded by the thrones of beings who saw her kind as nothing more than convenient servants. 300 years of service, 300 years of sacrifice, 300 years of hoping that kindness and hard work would eventually be rewarded. She thought of her mother, who had died still believing recognition would come. Her grandmother, who had spent her entire career fighting for this single cause. 7 generations of Vasquez diplomats, all making the same petition, all receiving the same answer. Perhaps next century, Alina walked slowly to the communication terminal in the corner of the hall. Her hands were steady as she entered her authorization codes and opened a secure channel to Earth. They've refused again, she transmitted. The response came in 4 words that would reshape the cosmos. Then we are finished. Alina closed the channel. For the first time in 300 years, humanity would stop asking, stop serving, stop hoping. It was time for the galaxy to learn what it had really been given and what it was about to lose. The first sign that something had changed came 3 days after Elena's transmission to Earth on the trading station orbiting Kethri Prime. A human merchant named David Park closed his shop. He had run this small business for 15 years. Selling Earth spices and fabrics to the insectoid workers who found human goods exotic and fascinating, his shop had become a landmark, a place where different species gathered to share stories and sample strange foods from a distant blue world. On that morning, David simply locked his doors, loaded his possessions onto a transport shuttle, and left without saying goodbye. His Cathari customers clicked their mandibles in confusion when they found the shop empty. They assumed he would return. Humans always returned. They were reliable like that. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out in the following weeks. Dr. Sarah Chen, chief medical officer on the Varathi hospital ship Eternal Light, submitted her resignation after 20 years of service. She had saved thousands of crystalline lives, adapting human medical techniques to treat conditions that Varathi doctors had declared incurable. Her patients wept when they heard the news. their crystalline bodies dimming with grief. "Why?" the hospital administrator demanded. "Your contract has another decade remaining. We have offered you everything. More payment. Better quarters. Whatever you need." Sarah simply smiled sadly and shook her head. Some things cannot be bought. She was gone within the day. Engineer Marcus Webb, who had spent 30 years maintaining the FTL beacon network in the Outer Rim, handed over his duties to a confused synthetic assistant and departed on the next transport to human space. "The maintenance protocols are in the database," he said. "Everything is documented." "But we do not understand the underlying code," the synthetic protested. "It was written by humans. It uses logic patterns that our processors cannot fully interpret." Marcus shrugged. "Then I guess you'll have to figure it out." One by one, in every corner of the collective's vast territory, humans began to leave. They did not make speeches. They did not demand negotiations. They simply packed their belongings, completed their final duties, and went home. The collective barely noticed at first. High Arbiter Zixthiel received reports of the withdrawals with mild curiosity. "Let them go," he decreed. "They will return when they realize how much they need our protection and resources." Humans are practical creatures. The Cathari-Vorathi negotiations collapsed within a week. Without human mediators, the ancient hatreds between the two species erupted immediately. The Vorathi delegate accused the Cathari of hiding weapons in the disputed asteroid belt. The Cathari accused the Vorathi of sabotaging their mining operations. Within days, both sides were mobilizing fleets. The collective appointed a new mediation team from the Luminari, ancient species who considered themselves the wisest beings in the galaxy. The Luminari had always looked down on humanity's approach to diplomacy. Viewing it as simplistic and overly emotional, their mediation lasted exactly 4 hours, for both the Cathari and Vorathi walked out. More furious than before, the humans were better at this, the Cathari delegate admitted grudgingly. "They understood us. Where are the humans?" The Vorathi demanded. "Why have they abandoned their posts?" "They have been recalled to their territory for consultation," a Luminari administrator replied. "They will return soon." But the humans did not return. Commander Rethel of the Cathari swarm was not a diplomat or a politician. He was a military officer, trained to analyze threats and plan for contingencies. When his fleet was ordered to patrol the border near human space, he decided to review the intelligence. Files on humanity. What he found disturbed him deeply. The files were scattered across multiple databases, compiled by different officers over 3 centuries. No one had ever bothered to consolidate them into a complete picture. Rethal spent 3 days, gathering every scrap of information his security clearance allowed. Human infrastructure projects, completed across collective space, 847. This included communication relays, medical facilities, agricultural domes, educational institutions, and transportation networks. Each project had been built to human specifications, using human designs. Human design systems currently in use. FTL navigation protocols. Covered 78% of all charted routes. Medical synthesis equipment designed by humans operated in 94% of collective hospitals. Human agricultural adaptations fed approximately 340 billion sentient beings across 12 species. Human personnel in critical positions, 12.4 million individuals, serving as engineers, doctors, teachers, diplomats, administrators, and technicians throughout collective space. Rethal's compound eyes processed this data again and again, looking for errors. There were none. They didn't conquer us, he whispered to himself, his mandibles barely moving. They made themselves indispensable. He thought about what would happen if all 12.4 million humans simply stopped working. Not sabotage. Not rebellion. Just ... stopped. The FTL networks would degrade without proper maintenance. Ships would get lost. Communications would fail. The medical systems would malfunction without human technicians to repair them. The agricultural systems would collapse without human botanists to maintain. the delicate hybrid crops, and no one else knew how to fix any of it. Humans had spent 3 centuries quietly becoming the foundation upon which the entire collective rested. They had done it openly, without deception. They had simply worked hard, solved problems, and made themselves useful. The collective had watched them do it. The collective had encouraged them to do it. The collective had benefited enormously from their labor, and the collective had never once stopped to think about what would happen if the humans decided to leave. Rathel immediately requested an audience with the Ketheri High Council. His request was denied. The council was busy preparing for war against the Varathi. He tried to contact the collective directly. His messages went unanswered. Everyone was too focused on the immediate crisis to listen to warnings about a hypothetical future disaster on the border of human space. Rethel watched his sensors track the steady stream of transport ships heading toward Earth. Thousands of vessels, carrying millions of humans, all going home. They weren't running away, he realized. They weren't fleeing in panic. They were withdrawing in an orderly, organized manner. Like an army retreating to prepared positions, the galaxy had spent 300 years treating humanity like servants, like tools to be used and discarded, like children to be tolerated, never respected. Now those servants were walking away, and nobody in power was paying attention. Rethel filed his final report, knowing it would be ignored like all the others. Then he did something he had never done in his military career. He prayed. He prayed that someone, somewhere, would wake up before it was too late, but deep in his thorax, where Ketheri kept their deepest fears. Rethal knew the truth. It was already too late. The humans had been planning this for a long time. Perhaps for generations. They had smiled and served and helped, all while knowing that someday they would need to remind the galaxy of their worth. The day had finally come, and the galaxy was not ready. 60 days after humanity's withdrawal began, the galaxy started to fall apart. The first major disaster happened in the Outer Rim. Far from the wealthy core worlds where the collective's leaders lived in comfort, navigation beacon 774 went dark without warning. The beacon had been designed by human engineers, built with human components, and maintained by human technicians for 200 years. Without it, ships traveling through that sector had no way to calculate safe FTL jumps. The synthetic Concorde dispatched a repair team immediately. Their finest engineers spent 3 days studying the beacon systems, trying to understand the human-designed code that controlled its functions. The logic is strange, the lead engineer reported. It uses patterns we cannot predict. The humans built redundancies into redundancies, safety systems we did not know existed. We cannot repair it without understanding it, and we cannot understand it. While they struggled, a cargo freighter attempted to navigate the sector using outdated charts. It emerged from FTL 17,000 kilometers off course, directly in the path of an asteroid. 300 crew members died instantly, a passenger liner carrying pilgrims to Illuminari. Holy Site made the same mistake 2 days later. 30,000 souls lost. By the end of the month, shipping through the Outer Rim had essentially stopped. The economic damage was measured in trillions of credits, but that was only the beginning. On Varathi Prime, the agricultural domes began to fail. The Varathi were crystalline beings who could not digest organic matter directly. For millennia, they had survived on synthesized minerals extracted from their planet's crust. But 3 centuries ago, human botanists had developed a revolutionary hybrid crop that converted solar energy into crystalline nutrients far more efficiently than any previous method. The Varathi had adopted this crop eagerly. It was cheaper, more abundant, and more nutritious than their traditional food sources. Within 2 generations, the hybrid crops had become the foundation of Varathi agriculture. Now, without human botanists to maintain the delicate genetic balance, the crops were dying. The plants require constant adjustment, the Varathi agricultural minister explained to the planetary council. Small changes in sunlight, temperature, mineral content, The humans did this automatically, almost instinctively. We documented their methods, but documentation is not understanding. How long do we have? The council leader asked. At current consumption rates, perhaps 6 months before food shortages become critical. A year before famine, the Vorathi were not the only ones facing this problem. Human agricultural techniques had been adopted by 8 different species. All of them were now watching their food supplies slowly collapse. Medical systems followed the same pattern. Human doctors had spent centuries adapting treatments across species barriers. They had developed protocols for handling the crystalline physiology of the Vorathi, the chitinous biology of the Cathari, the digital consciousness of the synthetics. These protocols were enormously complex, requiring constant updates as new diseases emerged and populations changed. Without human oversight, the medical systems began making mistakes. A Cathari hatchery received incorrect hormone treatments because the automated systems could not interpret the latest update to human design protocols. Thousands of eggs failed to develop properly. A Vorathi hospital administered a treatment that worked perfectly on previous patients, but proved fatal to a new crystalline variant that had emerged since the last human review. The synthetic Concord lost an entire processing cluster when their consciousness transfer protocols encountered an error that human technicians would have caught and corrected in minutes. Throughout the collective, beings of every species began to realize the same terrible truth. They had built their civilization on human foundations, and those foundations were crumbling. High Arbiter Zixthiel finally understood the scope of the disaster when his personal transport ship experienced navigation failure. The ancient serpent had never traveled anywhere without human-maintained systems guiding his path. Now, for the first time in centuries, he was stranded. "Get me the human ambassador," he commanded. "Cannot, High Arbiter." Ambassador Vasquez departed for Earth 40 days ago. All human diplomatic staff have been recalled, and contact Earth directly. Demand they return their workers. We have tried, High Arbiter. The humans are not responding to any communications. Zixtel felt something he had not experienced in 4,000 years. Helplessness. The collective held an emergency session. For the first time in history, all 12 species agreed on something. They would send a fleet to Earth's borders and demand the return of human workers. If the humans refused, they would face consequences. The armada that assembled was the largest in collective history. Warships from every species, carrying enough firepower to destroy a solar system. They crossed the galaxy in 3 days, arriving at the edge of human space with weapons charged and ultimatums. Prepared, Admiral Chen Whalen met them with a fleet 1/10 their size. Her ships were old, some dating back to the earliest days of human space travel. They had no advanced weapons, no shields, no technology that could match even the weakest collective vessel. The collective commander laughed when he saw them. "This is their defense? This is what they send against us?" He opened a communication channel to the human flagship. "Admiral Chen, you are ordered to stand down immediately. Return your specialists to their posts, or we will destroy your fleet and take them by force." Admiral Chen appeared on screen. She was small and gray-haired, her face lined with age. She looked like someone's grandmother. She smiled. "Before you fire a single shot," she said calmly, "I recommend you review the file I am about to transmit." The file arrived in the collective commander's database 3 seconds later. It contained a schematic, not of weapons or defenses, but of systems. Every piece of human design technology currently operating in collective space. Every navigation beacon, every medical synthesizer, every agricultural control system, every communication relay, and buried deep in the code of each one, so deep that no one had ever noticed, was a single subroutine. The collective commander's tentacles went rigid as he processed what he was seeing. "We call it the Conscience Protocol," Admiral Chen explained. "We installed it 300 years ago, when we first began building systems for the collective. We hoped we would never need it. We hoped you would treat us as partners, as equals." "You would not dare," the commander whispered. "We do not need to activate it. We do not need to destroy anything. We simply need to go home, close our borders, and wait." Admiral Chen's smile faded. How long can your civilization survive without us? A year? 5 years? How many billions will die while you fight over the scraps of what we built together? The communication channel fell silent behind Admiral Chen. The ancient human fleet held position. They were not a threat. They did not need to be. The real weapon had been installed 3 centuries ago. With every helpful deed, every solved problem, every gift freely given, the collective had always seen humanity's kindness as weakness. They were only now beginning to understand their mistake. The great war fleet of the collective hung motionless in space, weapons powered down, waiting for orders that did not come. Inside the flagship, 12 species argued. The Cathari demanded immediate attack. The Varathi counseled caution. The synthetic Concord calculated probability outcomes, each scenario worse than the last. The Luminari insisted that surely there must be some negotiated solution. High Arbiter Zixtel watched them squabble from his private chamber aboard his personal vessel. He had lived for 1,000 years. He had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. He had guided the collective through crises that would have destroyed lesser civilizations he had never faced. Anything like this? The data from the Conscience Protocol file played across his screens again and again. He studied it with growing horror, tracing the web of human influence through every critical system in collective space. They had not hidden it. That was the most disturbing part. Humans had built their systems openly, documented their work thoroughly, trained local technicians wherever possible. They had done everything transparently, everything correctly, and still, somehow, nobody else could replicate what they did. It was not sabotage. It was not conspiracy. It was simply that humans thought differently. They approached problems from angles that other species could not imagine. They found solutions that seemed impossible until they existed. The collective had used human creativity for 3 centuries without ever understanding it. Now that creativity had become a trap, summon. The council, Zixel, ordered all leaders. No weapons. We will go to the humans ourselves. Such a gesture was unprecedented. The High Arbiter traveling without military escort to a hostile border, it showed weakness. It invited attack. What attack? Zixel replied wearily. They do not need to attack us. They merely need to wait. The delegation that assembled at Earth's border was the most powerful gathering in galactic history. The supreme rulers of all 12 collective species, traveling in unarmed diplomatic vessels. Approaching humanity as equals for the first time, they were met at the diplomatic station, humanity's hope. Ambassador Elena Vasquez waited for them in the main conference room. She wore a simple gray suit, the same one she had worn for every appearance before the collective over the past 10 years. Her hair was grayer now than it had been 2 months ago. The stress of what she had set in motion showed in the lines around her eyes, but her voice was steady when she spoke. High Arbiter. Honored delegates, you are welcome in human space. Zixel coiled himself into a position of formal respect, something he had not done for any being in over 1,000 years. The other delegates followed his example, each assuming postures of humility according to their species' customs. Ambassador Vasquez, Zixel, began. We have come to apologize? Alina interrupted. Negotiate? Demand? Which is it, High Arbiter? I have heard many opening words from your kind over the years. I am curious which you will choose today. The ancient serpent's scales rippled with discomfort. We have come to acknowledge our mistakes. Your mistakes. Alina sat down at the head of the conference table, leaving the 12 most powerful beings in the galaxy standing before her. Please, describe these mistakes. A long silence filled the room. Finally, the Varathi delegate spoke. We took you for granted. We used your skills without proper respect. We dismissed your requests for recognition, the Cathari added. We told you to wait for centuries that you do not live. We treated you as servants when you acted as partners, said the Luminari representative. One by one, each species admitted their role in humanity's mistreatment. They cataloged 300 years of casual dismissal, broken promises, and institutional disrespect. Alina listened to it all without expression. When they finished, she remained silent for a long moment. "My grandmother stood before your predecessors," she finally said. "She asked for simple recognition. The right to exist as equals. She was told to wait. My mother asked the same thing. She was told to wait. I asked, and I was told the same." She stood and walked to the viewport, gazing out at the stars. 300 years ago, humanity wanted friendship. We came to you with open hands and open hearts. We wanted to learn from you, to work alongside you, to build something wonderful together. She turned back to face them. 200 years ago, we wanted respect. We had proven ourselves useful. We had solved problems, healed wounds, built systems that made life better for trillions. We thought surely now, you would see us as worthy of recognition. Her voice hardened. 100 years ago, we wanted equality. Nothing more. Just the acknowledgement that we had earned a place at your table. That our short lives and soft bodies did not make us lesser beings. And now? Zixel asked quietly. Elena's eyes met his. "Now we want you to understand something." She touched a control panel, and the viewport transformed into a display. Earth appeared, blue and green and beautiful, surrounding it. The 12 colony worlds that comprised human territory. Small, fragile, everything that humanity had built over millennia of struggle. "We are not your servants," Elena said. "We are not your mediators. We are not your engineers or your doctors or your convenient solution to problems you created." She let the words hang in the air. "We are humanity, and we will never again beg for what should have been freely given." The Cathari delegate stepped forward, his massive form somehow diminished. "What would you have us do? How can we make amends?" "You cannot make amends," Alina replied. 300 years of service cannot be repaid. 7 generations of my family gave their lives to your causes, and they died without ever being seen as equals. That debt is not something you can settle. Then what do you want?" The Varathi asked desperately. "Name your terms. We will agree to anything." Alina shook her head slowly. "That is exactly the problem. You still think this is a negotiation? You still believe there is some deal to be made, some compromise to be reached." She walked back to the table and placed her hands flat on its surface. "This is a lesson, and the lesson is simple. Respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. You had 3 centuries to earn our respect, and you failed. Now you must live with the consequences of that failure." "Will you watch us die?" Zixel asked. "Will you stand by while billions perish?" For the first time, something soft flickered across Elena's face. "We are not cruel, High Arbiter. We never were. That is the tragedy of all this. We only ever wanted to help." She sat down and folded her hands. "We will return. Our engineers will repair your systems. Our doctors will heal your sick. Our diplomats will mediate your conflicts. We will do all the things we have always done." Hope flared in the delegate's eyes. "But," Elena continued, "we will do it as equals. Full sovereignty for human space. A permanent seat on the collective council. Not as mediators standing in the center, begging for scraps. As members, as partners, as equals." She leaned forward. "And every human who serves outside our borders will be treated with the respect they deserve. Not tolerated. Not used, respected." The 12 leaders looked at each other. Centuries of tradition, of hierarchy, of assumed superiority, crumbled before them. Zixthal lowered his great head. "We accept," he said. "All of it." Alina nodded slowly. "Then perhaps in another 300 years, we can build the friendship we always wanted." She stood and extended her hand. A human gesture of agreement. The most powerful being in the galaxy reached out and took it. 5 years had passed since humanity walked away from the negotiation. The great hall of the collective looked different now. The obsidian floors still stretched across 3 kilometers, and the crystalline pillars still rose toward the captured star above. But the arrangement of thrones had changed. Where once 12 seats had formed a circle, with empty space in the center for petitioners, Now 13 seats stood together in a curved line, equal in size, equal in position, equal in every way. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, now first speaker of humanity, took her place among the rulers of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. She moved carefully, her joints aching with age. At 62, she was ancient by human standards for someone in such a demanding position. But she had refused to retire until this moment arrived. The Treaty of Terra had taken 2 years to negotiate. Every detail had been debated, refined, and documented. Human sovereignty was absolute. Human colonies were protected under collective law. Human citizens serving abroad received full diplomatic status and legal protection. More importantly, humanity finally had a voice. "The session will come to order," announced the ceremonial herald. A position that had once been held by humans, but was now rotated among all 13 species. Alina looked around the chamber at beings she had spent her entire career trying to reason with. The Cathari delegate, successor to the one who had walked out of negotiations 5 years ago, clicked his mandibles in greeting. The Varathi representative pulsed with calm blue light, a sign of contentment in their species. Even High Arbiter Zixthal, his scales dulled with the weight of his 4,000 years, inclined his head respectfully. Everything had changed, and nothing had changed. The disputes were still there. The Cathari and Varathi still bickered over their ancient territorial claims. The synthetic concord still struggled to gain full acceptance from biological species. The Luminari still believed themselves wiser than everyone else. But now, when these conflicts threatened to boil over, there was a human voice at the table. Not standing in the center, begging for attention, sitting among equals, with equal power to shape outcomes. The first matter on the agenda is a trade dispute between 2 minor species on the outer rim. Alina listened as both sides presented their cases, filled with accusations and counter-accusations that reminded her of the countless mediations she had conducted before the withdrawal. When they finished, the Luminar delegate immediately proposed a solution. Speaking with the casual authority of a species that assumed its wisdom was beyond question. "The human speaker will now respond." The herald announced. Alina stood slowly. "I thank the Luminari delegate for their proposal," she said. "However, I believe we should hear from both parties before deciding on a course of action. What do the Kelthari actually want? What would make them feel that justice has been served?" The Kelthari delegation, small insectoid beings who had barely spoken during their presentation, stared at her in surprise. "No one has asked us that before," their leader admitted. "Then I am asking now." It took 3 hours, but by the end of the session, both parties had reached an agreement that satisfied their actual needs rather than imposing a solution from above. They left the chamber grateful and at peace. The Luminari delegate approached Alina afterward, their glowing form flickering with what she had learned to recognize as confusion. "You could have resolved that matter in minutes," they said. "You had the authority to impose a decision. Why waste time asking what they wanted?" Alina smiled. "Because that is what we humans have always done. We listen, we ask questions, we try to understand. That is not weakness, honored delegate. It is how real solutions are found." The Luminari considered this for a long moment. "Perhaps," they admitted, "we have underestimated your methods." "Perhaps you have," Alina agreed. "But there is time to learn." She walked out of the great hall, her footsteps echoing across the obsidian floor. A young human aide fell into step beside her, carrying her documents and notes. First speaker. "The Cathari delegation has requested a private meeting to discuss enhanced cooperation in the medical sciences. And the Vorathi have asked if human agricultural experts would be willing to train their own specialists rather than simply operating the systems for them." Alina nodded. "Schedule both meetings." "And Marcus?" "Yes, first speaker. Make sure our experts know that they are there to teach, not to serve. We share our knowledge freely now, but we do not do the work for others. They must learn to stand on their own." "Understood, first speaker." This was the new arrangement. Humanity still helped. They still solved problems and healed wounds and built systems. But they did so as partners, sharing their knowledge rather than hoarding it, teaching rather than simply doing. It was harder this way. More frustrating, The other species struggled with human methods, often failing before they succeeded. But slowly, generation by generation, they were learning, and humanity was learning too. They had learned that kindness without boundaries becomes exploitation, that service without recognition breeds resentment, that the desire to help must be balanced with the wisdom to know when help becomes harm. Alina paused at a viewport overlooking the station's gardens, where plants from 100 worlds grew together in carefully maintained harmony. Human botanists had designed these gardens 3 centuries ago. Now, teams from multiple species work together to maintain them. First speaker. She turned to find High Arbiter Zixtal approaching. The ancient serpent moved more slowly than he had 5 years ago. The stress of the crisis had aged even him. High Arbiter, I did not expect to see you outside the council chamber. I wanted to speak with you privately. Zixtal coiled beside her, gazing out at the gardens. I have ruled the collective for 4,000 years. In that time, I believed I understood power. I believed that power came from strength, from military might, from the ability to destroy. He turned his golden eyes toward her. Your species taught me otherwise. Power comes from being needed, from building systems that others depend upon, from making yourself indispensable through service rather than threat. That was never our intention, Alina said quietly. We simply wanted to help. That is what makes it so remarkable. Zixtal's tongue flickered out, tasting the air. You did not plan your indispensability. You did not scheme for power. You simply worked and helped and built, and power grew naturally from your efforts. Some would call that naive. I would have. Once, the ancient serpent's scales shifted in what Alina had learned to recognize as a sigh. Now I call it wisdom. The deepest kind of wisdom, the kind that most species never discover. They stood together in silence, watching the gardens grow. The universe has changed, Zixtal said finally. Because of you, because humanity refused to accept the role we assigned you. The universe was always going to change, Alina replied. We simply ensured that the change would benefit everyone, not just the powerful. She turned away from the viewport and began walking toward her quarters. Her bones ached, and she was tired. She had earned her rest. First speaker Zixtal called after her. When you retire, who will take your place? Alina smiled over her shoulder. Someone younger. Someone who did not grow up begging for recognition. Someone who knows their worth from the beginning. She walked on, leaving the High Arbiter alone with his thoughts. Outside the station, stars burned across the infinite darkness. On 1,000 worlds, beings of every shape and size went about their lives, most of them unaware of the crisis that had nearly destroyed everything. But somewhere on every one of those worlds, there was a human, teaching, helping, building, not as servants, anymore as equals, as partners, as friends. The universe had trembled when humanity left the negotiation table. It had learned a lesson that would echo through history for millennia to come. The most powerful force in existence is not the ability to destroy. It is the courage to walk away, and the wisdom to know when to come.